All right, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at some of the basics of jQuery. jQuery, remember, is a library that you're adding into JavaScript, so it's not JavaScript, it's just extra functionality that has been written in. It's free, available to the public, and it really does simplify a lot of things. So in the first jQuery video, what I'm going to do is just show you some of the ways that you can manipulate styles and things like that. And then in our second jQuery video, we'll take a look at just some of the small changes that have to do with the event handler. So we have our framework page set up here, and I want to point out a couple of things before we go on so you understand. You don't need to watch me type all this HTML. So the first thing is, look here in the style tag. I've pre-written a style named new heading that's going to change the color of the text to white, the background color to purple. We'll change the font family to Arial, and we'll increase the font size a little bit to 30 points. So we're going to use that later on when we add that class to elements on our page. The next thing I want you to pay attention to is that I've linked externally to the jQuery library, and this is what I want you to do in your lab. You can download it and install it on your machine if you want to, but for grading purposes and to make sure we're all using the same version, in your labs I do want you to go ahead and link to the newest jQuery available from the jQuery website. Notice that we put the script in, you have a source attribute, but also you have a closing script tag with nothing in between it. That brings that script in and makes it available to your page, because then what we're going to have is our own set of script tags where we're going to write our own jQuery script in JavaScript. So close the head section, we open up the body section. I have 3 buttons that are going to change one's labeled change paragraphs, one's change class on H1, and one's going to add an image to the page. And I've already set on click events in the HTML. I'm not going to use the event handler just yet. I'm going to have a simple on click and call our function that we're going to write in the script page. So I also have some things that I'm going to use during the demo. I have an H1 on the page that has an ID of the heading that says welcome to our jQuery page, and then I have 3 different paragraphs. So I just have this framework set up so we have some things to work with when we're doing this. Let me go ahead and click on over to the browser and show you the page. This is what it looks like. We click change paragraphs. We're obviously going to change something there. Change the class on H1. We're going to change it to the new one, and then we click here and we're going to add an image to the page on the fly. So let's go back and do that work. Let's just start with change paragraphs. So I need a function named change para. I'm going to go up here in my script tag, and I'm going to do a function definition named change para. I'm going to go ahead and open and close those curly braces. And so what we're going to do here is we are going to change the CSS of all of the paragraphs on the page using our jQuery. And again, this allows us to select all things on the page a little bit easier. We a lot of times won't have to loop through them if we're just changing CSS, because the methods that are included in that jQuery library help let us do it pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable named all paragraphs, and I'm going to set it to the $, which is the substitute symbol for the jQuery object. It seems weird at first, but after a while you get used to using it. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of the paragraphs from the page. And so what that does is it stores them in an array. And in regular JavaScript, once you have an array of those, you would have to loop through them, changing the style that you want to change. But in this case, what we can do is we can just go ahead and say all paragraphs .css, and that allows us to go ahead and access the CSS on all of those at one time. Now in jQuery, what we're going to do is we're going to feed in what style we want to change. So in this case, I'm going to change the background color. And the other parameter we're going to send in is the value that we're going to change it to. So we have our property value right there. Now the selector for the P, this can be any selector that is valid in CSS. So it could be an ID, it could be a class, it could be an HTML tag in this case. And so we can select, we have a lot of power to select things off the page pretty easily. And then we also have the ability to manipulate them pretty easy. Another thing I want to point out is inside these double quotes, when you're sending in the property that you're going to change, you can send it in one of two ways. You can use the CSS property with the dash, or you can use the JavaScript approach where it removes the dash and capitalizes the C in background color. jQuery is pretty flexible and it allows you to do either of them. So that's really all we have to do. I'm going to go ahead and save this and we're going to test this as we go. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of that extra space. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back over to our browser and I reload it. And so now when I click change paragraphs, it does exactly like we expected and changes all of the background colors without us having to loop through an array of those. So that's the first example we're going to look at, is just how to change one background property. I'm sorry, one CSS property if you want to do that and change individual property value pairs. But what I'm going to do next is we're going to go ahead and work on change class on H1. Remember, our H1 has an ID of the heading, so we'll use that to select it. And then we will use the add class method from our jQuery. So let's go ahead and create our next function. We're going to have function named change class. And go ahead and open and close my curly braces so I don't forget. So again, just like the example before, we're going to go ahead and set up a variable and we're going to name it heading change, and I'm going to set that equal to the jQuery object, and we're going to select # or hashtag the heading. And so what I've told it is I've told it that I want to select everything on this page that has an ID of the heading, which in this case is only our H1. So we've selected that. Now we could have also selected by H1 if we wanted to. That would select all H1s on the page. So if I only wanted it to be on this one, then I would do it by heading or class. But if I wanted to do all H1s on the page, if we had more of them, I could just select the H1 tag like I did the P tag up here. So what we're going to do this time, instead of change the CSS, is we're going to add class. So we tell it to go to heading change, which is what our object is stored in, and we just do add class. And then we tell it the name of the new class that we're going to add. So remember, up in the code up here, I have a style named new heading. Now, when you define the class in CSS, you always put a dot in front of it, but when you are adding the class down here, be sure and do not put that period on or it's going to cause some problems. So let's save that one. Let's go back and reload our page. Change class on H1. Didn't work. Well, let me see what happened. Change class, var heading change, $. I have wrong quotes here. I have single and double quotes mixed up. So let's see if that changes it. Reload it. Change class on H1. So it didn't change individual CSS styles like we did in the first one. What it did is it went in and changed the class, or added the class that caused that styling to be done. So change paragraphs works, change H1s works, so now the last one we have to do is to add an image. And this was appending things to the DOM from earlier chapters. Again, this makes it pretty easy to do using your jQuery. I'm going to go ahead and create my next function. I'm going to name it add image because that's what my function call is looking for. And of course, open and close my curly braces. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set up our new image, and we're going to tell it, we're going to set up a variable, and we're going to tell it what kind of HTML we're going to add. And then we're going to use the attribute property to set all the properties we need to put an image on the page. So I think I want to say in your book it gives an example of the A tag where you can add a link to the end of your page, and so you have to send in things like the href attribute and stuff like this. In this case, we're going to create a new image tag, which means we're going to have things like source and height and width and the alt tag. So once we have all those attributes stored in our variable, what we'll do is we'll then use the .append method to append our new object. So I'm going to show you two different ways. I'm going to use those hummingbird pictures from an early example that are stored in the same folder as our file here. So I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. Either or is fine, just it's personal preference. But I'm going to go ahead and var, let's call it new image. And I'm going to set that equal to the jQuery object, and in parentheses I'm going to tell it that I'm going to add an image tag. Now the syntax, even though the image tag doesn't have a closing tag on it normally, when you're using jQuery like this, you are going to put that ending slash there. And then I'm going to chain on, which is another neat factor of jQuery. I'm going to chain on the attribute property, and what we're going to do is we're going to feed it multiple attributes. So we would normally put our attribute in here in pair and attribute and value, and we could do these on each individual line if we wanted to. We could do, you know, new image dot attribute, new image dot attribute, new image, etc., etc. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the parentheses, and then I'm going to open up the curly braces, and I'm going to be sure to close those curly braces again, because notice I'm starting to stack up some curly braces. And then after that curly brace, I'm going to put my closing parentheses in for the attribute method to set the attribute. I said property earlier, but we're setting an attribute. It's a method. So these curly braces are going to contain all of my attributes that I type, and then that's going to be surrounded by the parentheses there. So what I do now is I just name the attribute that I want to set, put in a colon, and then feed it the information that I'm going to set it with. So the first thing we need to do for an image is we need to set the source. And so I'm going to say that we want to see hummingbird2.jpg. And then these attributes need to be separated by a comma. But I'm going to put them on a different line just for readability, and that's how you'll see it a lot of time. So I'm going to set the height attribute at 200, comma. I'm going to set the width attribute, double quotes, at 400, comma, and then finally I'm going to set the alt attribute, which gives that adds the text description of the file, and I'm going to set that to hummingbird and garden. Okay, and then close my curly braces, close my parentheses, and then have a semicolon. So what that does is it sets up that object here in new image. So the next thing I need to do is I need to then go into the jQuery object, go into the document, go to the body, and use the append method, and I just send in my new image that I just created. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, make sure I didn't make any errors. We go back to our page, reload it, and this time when I click add image, we get a picture of a hummingbird. So change paragraphs works, change H1s work, and now our add image works. There's a dot remove, so you could toggle these on if you wanted to have a remove image, and it would remove that image. But it's a real short way to work with the DOM to get it to add the image. There's another way you can do it. I'm going to go ahead and add another image just to show you. I'm going to var image2. I'm going to set that equal to the jQuery object, and what I can do is I can type all of my HTML that I actually want to append. So instead of going through that attributes like that, I can actually type it out like this. The thing you have to worry about is you need to make sure that your quotes and are not going to mess up. So I have image source equals, and normally I would put a double quote here if I were just writing regular HTML. But I can't do that because if I use a double quote, what's going to happen is it's going to think that I'm closing this opening quote, and then it would be nonsense from there on out. So what you have to do is you need to use alternating sets of single quotes. So everything that's inside this encapsulating double quote, if I need double quotes here, I actually need to default to single quotes. So I'm going to go ahead and put single quote, hummingbird. I can't type hummingbird, I always type hummingbird. Hummingbird 6.jpg, close the single quote, height equals single quote 200, width equals single quote 400, and then alt equals single quote another hummingbird. Put your closing HTML, sign in, close your quotes, your double quotes, and then your parentheses closes the method. So both ways work. It really just depends on which one you like. This one has quite a bit more grammar or syntax to it. If you're used to typing out your own HTML, you might prefer this way. So we'll go ahead and save that. Click on over to our page. Let's reload it. And when we click add image, it did not add our second image. So let me see if I can figure out what went wrong. No, I cannot tell. So hummingbird, height, width, alt equals another hummingbird. Oh, I forgot to append it. I created image 2 and then I forgot to append it. So program does exactly what I told it to do. So I need to go ahead and, like above, do my append. And this time we'll send in image 2. That should work. No wonder there were no typos. It did exactly what I told it to do. So now hopefully when we reload and we add image, we get both of our images there. And you can see those. So that right there is an intro to some of the shortcuts that you can take with basic jQuery. And the next one, what I'll do is look at some of the shortcuts you can take using the event object, which doesn't differ too much from what we already know of our JavaScript.